All right, welcome to WSQ 27. Today we are going to be talking specifically about bacteria today. More specifically, we're going to be talking about how cells of bacteria, which are prokaryotes, are different from those of eukaryotes. We're going to talk about what bacteria need to survive. We're going to talk about the conditions that bacteria need to exist in or need to thrive and reproduce. And then we're going to talk about some of the positive roles that bacteria play in people's lives. Bacteria oftentimes are only considered negative because of the possible infectious nature of them. But we need to understand that bacteria also do have some positive benefits for humankind, and so we'll talk about that as well today. So let's jump right in. First of all, it's important just to kind of start out with a definition of what we mean when we say bacteria and where are they found. I have just some images here for you to just give you some ideas. Bacteria is found in cheese, it's found in yogurt, it's found in chocolate and vinegar. There's lots of different places where we can find bacteria, and bacteria is probably one of the more common, well, is the most common organism on Earth. In fact, there's probably as much bacteria in you as there are people on the earth, and so it's a vastly, really common and prevalent type of organism, and they're used in all kinds of positive things and things that we would probably not consider. So next time you're drinking, you're eating your yogurt or having a piece of chocolate or eating some cheese, remember, think bacteria for that. At a cellular level, when we look at bacteria, this is what we're talking about. Bacteria are prokaryotes. Now that is really, really important. We need to understand this term. Okay, they are prokaryotes. That means that they do not have a nucleus. Okay, so we have no nucleus. They're non-nucleatic. Okay, so the genetic material in a bacteria, if we look over on this side, the genetic material is not housed inside of a nucleus. It's just contained in the actual bacteria organism. Bacteria are also single-celled. Okay, so we don't have, for example, like an animal where you have multiple cells and divisions of labor. We have one single cell, and that is the entire organism. And so that organism really has one cell that has to grow and divide, and that's how they reproduce. Bacteria can vary in size, and they have typically one of three different shapes: a spherical shape, a rod shape, and a spiral shape. This would be an example of a rod shape. You'll notice too that they do have some organelles that are a little bit more complex. They have ribosomes. Remember, ribosomes make proteins. They do have a cytoplasm. They do have a cell membrane and an outside cell wall. And bacteria also can have various numbers and types of flagella, which allow them to actually move on their own. So they are organisms because they are made of cells. They do grow. They can reproduce. They respond to their environment. They require energy. So that's what a bacterial cell looks like and what it is. Now, let's guess the shapes. I told you there are three types of shapes. Okay, Bacillus, Spirillum, and Coccus. Of course, this is Coccus. Coccus means spherical. Okay, that's a sphere-shaped bacteria. This is Bacillus, rod-shaped. So think of it kind of like a baseball bat. And then this would be an example of Spirillum, or spiral-shaped. So if you go to the doctor and if you've ever had, let's say, strep throat, the doctor might say you have Streptococcus. Coccus, that means Streptococcus or Streptococcus, that means the actual bacteria are spherical. If you looked at them under a microscope, that's what that name refers to. Now, we're going to do during this WSQ a little different is I'm just going to throw some questions out at us as a group and see what we think. So what are the similarities and differences between a prokaryote and a eukaryote? So think about that for a second. What are the similarities and differences between a prokaryote and a eukaryote? Well, both have genetic material, both have ribosomes, but prokaryotes do not have a nucleus or other membrane-bound organelles. So no nucleus in a prokaryote. Okay, really important. Eukaryotes do. How might studying bacteria under a microscope help scientists identify bacteria? Well, what did we learn? We just talked about the bacteria. One of the ways that we define them is by their shape. They have different appearances, different sizes, different shapes. And so scientists under a microscope can identify bacteria according to these various characteristics. let's talk about how bacteria obtain food and energy. Now, bacteria must have a source of food and a way of breaking down food into energy. Now, they can be in one of two classes, like most organisms. Bacteria can be autotrophic, okay? Autotrophic, remember what autotrophic means. An autotroph is an organism that makes their own food from photosynthesis or uses chemical energy from the environment. Okay, that's autotrophic. Some are also heterotrophs, which means they have to consume other organisms. So that's the two ways in which bacteria can obtain food and energy. So what are the two sources of energy for autotrophic bacteria? Well, it can be either sunlight or chemicals in the environment. And what is a source of energy for a heterotrophic bacteria? Well, that would be consuming other organisms or food that they make. How does bacteria reproduce? Well, this is important. Bacteria can reproduce in three ways. And the interesting thing about bacteria, with the proper food and the right temperatures and suitable conditions, bacteria can reproduce like none other. Some bacteria can reproduce as fast as every 20 minutes. So you literally can take a single bacteria at the beginning of the day, and by the end of the day is already reproduced into hundreds, just because of, if not, well, more than hundreds, thousands, just because of how quickly they can multiply. Typically, they fall into three different types. The first one is known as asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is a process that their specific form of asexual reproduction is called binary fission. But the term asexual reproduction, when we talk about that, we're not talking about, that's not just one specific example. That's a general term that refers to reproduction in which you only need one organism. So this is not, you don't need multiple organisms. There's not a mate necessary. It can be with a single organism. And they use binary fission, which is where the cell of the bacteria cell actually just divides in two. And what you end up getting is two new cells, kind of similar to mitotic cell division. What happens, remember, we're in mitosis, where the cell splits and you get two new cells. Well, that's kind of what binary fission looks like. They actually divide in this process. Some bacteria reproduce through sexual reproduction, and sexual reproduction would be where you have two organisms, right? So it's two organisms or two parent organisms that both generate, okay, genetic information that becomes the new organism. They use a particular type known as conjugation. Conjugation is where one bacteria transfers genetic material through a filament, like a bridge between another bacterium, and produces a new offspring. Okay, so that's conjugation that's used in sexual reproduction. And the third way is some of them actually do what's called endospore formation. And this second word here, spore, we're going to get into when we talk about plants. Plants, like if you think of, the ferns. Ferns reproduce by spores. Okay, and so what that means, they have these little hard things that aren't quite seeds, but they're spores, which are really small, thick-walled cells that store the genetic information in a harsh environment. And so endospore reproduction can take a long period of time. They can actually survive in really, really adverse situations, and their genetic material just sits there and waits in this endospore until the right time comes for them to actually go ahead and reproduce. So those are the three major types of bacterial reproduction. Let's review them. What are the two types of reproduction in bacteria? Now, there's two major types, asexual and sexual reproduction. What benefit is there in knowing how bacteria reproduce? Well, let's think about it. The benefit that we can find is we can promote the growth of good bacteria and prevent the reproduction of harmful bacteria. The more we know bacteria, the better we are able to fight bacterial infection, and the better we are to use bacteria positively and encourage that type of bacteria in our own bodies and in our world. Now, what does bacteria do in nature? What's the importance? What did God make bacteria for? Bacteria are important to people in a couple ways. Firstly, oxygen production. A lot of bacteria that are autotrophic produce oxygen. And remember, we need oxygen. So the bacteria is actually able to make oxygen out of, it's a waste product for the bacteria, but of course is a product we need to breathe in for cellular respiration. 2, food production. Bacteria, as we saw in the very first slide, help produce foods like cheese and sour cream and buttermilk and yogurt and bread and all these different things. So they're very vital to food production. Environmental recycling. Heterotrophic bacteria are decomposers, and that word decomposers is these are organisms in the environment that eat dead things. Basically, they recycle the dead organisms in our environment and make them into useful chemicals for us as living organisms. So heterotrophic bacteria that feed on other organisms can actually eat up the dead organisms, and they decompose, right? That process. Remember, if we didn't have the decomposers, then we would have dead stuff lying around all the time. And so bacteria are really important for that. Fourthly, they're important for environmental cleanup. They use bacteria, the image below, they'll actually use bacteria to clean up certain land and water issues like oil spills. They'll actually spread out bacteria that eat the oil and use the oil for their food. And those bacteria can multiply and quickly clean up a dangerous environmental situation. And lastly, they're used for health and medicine. I mean, many bacteria live in our digestive system, live in our mouth. They help us digest food. They help us make vitamins. They help us compete with the harmful bacteria that are going around in our body. And bacteria can also be engineered to produce medicines. If you know anyone that has diabetes, they probably rely on synthetic insulin that is made within bacteria. Bacteria are, because they reproduce so quickly, they can be used to make and engineer medicines very quickly as well. And so bacteria has a great role in our environment. So that's bacteria in a nutshell. The end of WSQ 27. You've watched it. I would encourage you guys now to go on to Haiku, answer those questions that have been throughout your video, and go ahead and write out your summary. Don't forget to take a look at those vocab words and start preparing for your vocab quiz that'll be coming up on those soon. And I will talk to you later. Bye.